professional writing in 2017. A lifelong public servant, Ron is a retiree of LA County's Health and Law Enforcement Administration. His short stories appear in Oyster River's pages and Writers Resist, and his poetry appears in Troublemaker, Firestarter, and The Opiate. He is a 2018 PEN America Emerging Voices Fellow. In 2022, World Stage Press published his poetry collection, Watts Uprise. His short story collection, Crooked Out of Compton, launched on Labor Day. So please join me in welcoming Ron Dowell. Okay, so I'm going to ask him some questions. All right. And after I've asked my questions, if there's anything I haven't covered, y'all feel free to chime in. Okay? But we're going to be respectful.
Yes,
we have to be.
Yes,
okay? Why do you write, Mr. Dowell?
I basically write because I can, and also to probably leave a legacy here and to avoid being erased. A lot of the things that I write about are based either directly or indirectly on my experiences or some of the stuff that some of my friends' experiences of growing up that I noticed. It's hard to find information. For example, I was raised partly in Jordan Downs housing projects in Watts. And if you go by that location now, it's practically been torn down and replaced. And the same for other housing projects that I lived in after that, which was like Palm Lane projects in where the Martin Luther King Jr. Hospital is right now. And they actually made us move to build a hospital after the Watts Rebellion. In 1966, we had to move. And so other than in our memories, our collective memories, the place doesn't exist. So even the Black Resource Library doesn't have an abundance of information about Palm Lane. Matter of fact, what little I have, I did get from here at the Resource Center, but a lot has not been written about it. So part of the reason is to avoid total erasure, because I think some things need to be remembered.
Do you think that that's by design, that a county institution does not have information about county residencies?
Absolutely, it's by design, because I actually approached the housing authority, the LA County Housing Authority, and tried to get more information on Palm Lane. And they told me they didn't have any information. And I was surprised they didn't have any pictures, they didn't have anything. And I did that through a public records request. Now, what few pictures I do have are I got from Martin Luther King Hospital probably about 20 or 25 years ago, because there was a person there who collected, tried to collect as much as he could about Palm Lane. And he let me have a couple of pictures, aerial shots and that kind of thing. So he was trying to maintain a record. But I was surprised that LA County doesn't have that. So yeah, it's been practically erased, really. And I am surprised LA County doesn't. And not only that, I was surprised by the attitude that they had when I asked for the information.
What type of attitude?
It was like, hey, we don't have this, and you can stop asking for it, because we're not gonna give you anything, you know. So yeah.
Okay. Who influenced your writing style?
All right, Ahmad, you got to go back and forth. Who influenced my writing style? A lot of folks. I went to UCLA Extension for about 12 years, where I studied fiction writing. Had I known short story fiction was the hardest genre to learn, I probably would have turned around and walked away, because people write novels, people write poetry, people write all kinds of things, but short story fiction is the hardest one. But I didn't know that. I just kind of stumbled across that program at UCLA, decided just to take a couple of classes. And 12 years to 13 years later, here I am. So who influenced the style? I would say a lot of those instructors did there. I mean, I took some of them repeatedly. Colette Sardar, Lou Matthews, Paul Mandenbaum, a whole bunch of them I took over and over because they offered the courses at different levels during different semesters. And so they had a great influence, because up until that point, I didn't really know a lot. I didn't know anything about writing fiction, matter of fact. All I learned about it was from them. And they introduced me to other authors. They have their own favorite authors. Flannery O'Connor kind of jumps out right immediately because she was one of Lou Matthews' favorite authors. So we studied her in depth. And there were a lot of other folks who also that I was introduced to by being in that particular program. So I have a lot of influences. Yeah, so I would say a lot of folks. Chekhov, all of the noted folks. You know, I can't think of now. I can't remember them right now because I'm getting old and can't remember titles and names and things. But yeah, I probably read just about all of the major. Hemingway. Matter of fact, he was a favorite of one of my instructors, and I had an opportunity to visit Cuba several years ago, and he has a house in Cuba. He's dead now, but the house that he had in Cuba was right there on the ocean, and they tried to keep it intact. So we were able actually to see his libraries where he wrote. The way he left it is the way it was still. And the thing about that was that they let you walk all the way. They let you walk through the house. And I'm looking, you know, I kept thinking anybody could just reach up there and take whatever they want, but they didn't, you know. So Hemingway and a lot of other folks I was introduced to in that writing program.
You said that short story writing is the hardest of the writing. Why? Is that in your opinion, or is that something that they say in literature, that short story writing is the hardest?
Well, it's both. I didn't really realize that until I ran across folks in writing saying that. Really, I didn't know. You know, like I said, had I known, I probably would have dropped out of that stuff. Really, but the reason is, most folks want to write novels. Because the perception is if you write a big novel, you're going to make a lot of money. And people do read more novels than they read short story collections, no doubt about it. But in the short story, it forces you to compress. You've got to make every word, every sentence count. Every paragraph has to count because you just don't have a lot of working space. And the trend now is being toward what's called flash fiction. See, when I started this journey, you could write a 5,000, 6,000 word story, and it was okay. But as time went on, the publishers began to demand less of short story writers, and there's this whole area now what they call flash fiction, which is about 1,000 word story. So you don't have a lot of time, even when you're doing 5,000 or 6,000 words, you don't have a lot of time to play with. With a novel, you could 40, 50,000 words, right? You could take your time and meander through that forever. But with a short story, it's compressed. You want to catch a person's attention, and you want to keep the attention through the whole story. All right, so that's what makes it so difficult. And a lot of people some will begin writing short stories in order to learn how to write and then to write a novel. Really, and I just don't have an interest in novels myself, but it's just that it's demanding. And if you want it to work, if it's going to work, you got to get it right. You know, that's it. You know, there's no place to play around.
Okay. Who are you reading now?
Good question. One of the authors I'm reading right now is sitting right here. Pat Forte. All aboard, right? It's a historical fiction book, and it's very informative too. I would encourage everybody to look at that book because just from the historical part, it puts you in that pre and post Reconstruction period, and it really shows. That book is probably more important now, since we've got this lunatic running things, it's more important now that we never forget where we came from. And that book will serve to remind us all where we were. And if you're not careful, you may be visiting those times again. So Pat is one, and I'm reading, of course, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Ta-Nehisi Coates, The Message, right? Because it was so controversial, and when you read that, you see why. Because the focus has been on Israel and all of the controversy about what he said about Israel, even though he writes about going to South Carolina and the synagogue before he even talks about Israel. But the focus is on Israel because what he's saying is that Israel is a reflection of the United States, really, but they're pretty much segregation, apartheid, this whole thing. And he was surprised to see that, given all this said about Israel. So I read that, and I find that he's absolutely, well, I haven't been to Israel, but when he comparing it to antebellum, the antebellum period here, but even subsequent to that, with all of the segregation and the apartheid and the caste system here, it's very similar to what's happening in Israel today. Reading Odie Hawkins, Little Sweets, because Odie, he's like me, we like short stories, even though Odie's written novels too, but this particular collection, Little Sweets, is a series of short stories, and I kind of gravitate toward that. And we write about our urban experiences a lot. He talks about Chicago, I talk about LA. The Stony Road by Lewis Gates, I'm reading that because, again, it's informative, it's a historical, it's history, that's really what it is. And it's very informative because it reminds us where we were, but he takes it a step forward, it explains why we were there. It's one thing to say we were enslaved, but it's another thing to talk about all of the mechanisms that were built to keep us enslaved, and he talks about that, and so I love it. Disillusioned by Harold, I can't think of his last name. It's the same thing, where he talks about how through housing covenants that we end up in this segregation period and how we were restricted where we could live, this kind of thing. So those are some of the ones that I'm kind of looking at right now.
Okay. Could you speak to us about craft?
Craft. That is why I ended up at UCLA, because I didn't know anything about the writing craft. And I didn't even realize it was a craft, because unfortunately my school experience, even though I had 2 master's degrees, 3 bachelor's degrees, I didn't know anything about the craft of writing until I got to the UCLA extension program, long after I finished college. And that's where I learned, like you mentioned earlier about short stories, you have to understand the craft to write a short story, because you got to understand how to use sensory details, the 5 senses, smell, touch, sight, hearing, the whole thing. I've added intuition as a 6th sense. You learn point of view, you learn description, you learn how to describe things. But again, with a short story, you don't really have a lot of time to work with. You can't spend a whole chapter describing something. So what you learn in short story writing is to describe it in a very compressed space. But you got to leave a picture still in the reader's mind. And that's one of the challenges. And it's all built around tension and conflict, this kind of thing. We were taught that you always have to, well, at least I do, I include tension and conflict because that's what keeps the reader's interest. It's like when you study journalism, what they teach you is that if it bleeds, it leads. And they know that, and if you read any newspaper article that you read, most of them at least, they will have something like that at the very beginning to get your interest and to keep it. So I learned the sensory detail, character development, because again, you got to try to figure out how to develop interesting characters. within that short space. So I learned the basics of the short story writing there at UCLA, and those particular craft elements plus others, really. Those are the main ones.
So basically what I got from you is when I did my English classes, they didn't teach me how to write. They just taught me how to answer questions so I could get my degree.
I guess it depends on where you went to. And with the schools I went to, they didn't even teach that. But, but I'm surprised to hear you say that, really, 'cause I thought that you probably would have a better experience than mine,
No,
really.
I mean, I was a history major, and I don't think that I've fully learned history, not in a classroom. Most of what I've learned about history has been through conversations
Okay.
and just exposure through, coming to different museums and what I've watched and just kind of, putting it all together to add on. Because what we have to remember, our history is told from a certain perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was teaching history, I needed to have the other perspective there.
Right.
And you can't have a full understanding of it until you have both.
Okay. Okay. So you said you only got part of the story. My English, I guess we would have probably run across that in secondary school English classes, but we didn't. We didn't read. We didn't hear a lot about poetry. I mean, the two poems that I know stand out in my mind from what I was exposed to in elementary school are two: Langston Hughes, Mother's to Son, and Rudyard Kipling, If. Those are the two. I mean, it wasn't a lot of time spent on literature. It just wasn't, really, so.
I love that you learned Langston Hughes. I didn't learn any Black authors until my junior year of college.
Is that right?
Yeah, but also I grew up in the Midwest. So I can tell you everything about Edgar Allan Poe.
Okay.
Yeah, The Raven, all of that.
Right.
But I didn't know, I knew that we wrote.
Mm-hmm.
I just had never read any of our writing
Mm-hmm.
until I got in a history classroom, got deep into my major,
Mm-hmm.
and our writings came up in one of the chapters, and then I just went to the library and geeked out and just read everything. But yeah.
Yeah, that's part of this. That's what Louis Gates talks about a lot, right? He talks about the fact that we were pretty much excluded, but he goes a little bit more into detail to kind of explain why that it is and those systems that were set up and designed for that to happen that way, really.
And so
But-
you have a whole generation, I'm 40, you have a generation, me and younger folks, who we don't know our history, and it's harder for us to fight for something that we don't know exists
Yep.
because of the way the picture has been.
Yep. I have a friend who talks about you don't know what you don't know. I mean,
I was talking to a young man in Long Beach today, and he was saying a lot of our history is hidden, and you have to really go look for it.
Mhm.
And so I'm like on a journey now. He's saying you have to really
But
look.
the crazy thing is, our history is hidden, but it's in plain sight as well. Because if we look at just things that we use on a daily basis,
Yeah.
we created it.
Yes.
Most folks don't know.
When we don't know.
Cell phone,
yeah.
doorknob,
I
stoplight,
know.
yeah.
I didn't even know, a few years ago, I did not know that slaves built the White House.
Mhm.
I didn't
Oh,
know.
just
And
a
the
few.
White House hasn't always been white.
Thank you.
It was because of a fire.
These are things that we have to
painted
really
over.
dig and find out.
Right.
Wow, wow. See, that's the thing, and it's only going to get kind of worse if these folks axe public education. Because I'm thinking, well, if you don't, where are you going to get it?
I know.
Right.
Really? So that's kind of the reason why I write, is because I want to try to maintain what I can, really, and hopefully others will do the same, because that's the only way it's going to happen, really.
Side note, would you ever consider any of your short stories being changed into films?
Actually, I got approached about 5 or 6 years ago. There's this story, Bruised, that was very popular, and there's this guy who wanted to film it. I mean, he was on me all the time. And the only reason he didn't, I think when he gave up, I brought my son Aaron, who's also a filmmaker, to a meeting with him. And I think after that meeting, we didn't talk very much, really, you know. And, you know, I'm looking out for my interests, really, because I didn't know, really. But he was hot on the case about making that particular story into a film. But, you know, if he comes back now, maybe we could talk about it, really, you know. But, yeah, I haven't really been approached. Other than him, he stands out because he really loved that story. Really, that's really what it was. A lot of people do.
Well, the reason I ask is because there's a trend right now that librarians are starting to catch on, where these streaming services are taking books and they're either making them into limited series or they're making movies out of them. So I don't know if you're familiar with like the book Black Cake. Hulu did a limited series, an 8-part limited series, and it's almost verbatim like the book. But it was an introduction for many to the story because they didn't even know that it was a book.
Right.
So just another option in order to get the stories out there and to make sure that the history lives on. Is it something that you would consider?
Absolutely, particularly since I got a son who is a filmmaker. I mean, maybe we could interest him in pursuing a film or two, but he literally teaches the stuff, and he's made films. So yeah, that's something that I would not be opposed to, as long as it's done right.
Okay.
You know, that would be the thing for me.
Okay. What was the Crooked Out of Compton journey like for you?
What was the Crooked Out of Compton journey like for me? Well, like I say, I started UCLA about 12, 13 years ago, and I just knew I wanted to tell some stories, particularly about places, Watts, Compton and stuff. And so I had written another book about, it dropped in 2012 called Compton for Cops. It was basically my master's thesis in the criminal justice program at Cal State Long Beach. I turned that into a book trying to tell the sheriff department how to deliver services in Compton since they bogarted their way into the city. And I thought I could help them improve on what they did. Because having worked for the sheriff's department and listening to what the internal communication going on, I knew it was never going to work because I knew they had an attitude toward Compton that I think still exists today. But for the money, they were willing to come on in there and do what they did. So I wrote a book, Compton for Cops, for a twofold purpose. One, that tells the sheriff how to do a better job in Compton since they were there, but also to try to explain policing to the Compton community. I came of age during the Watts Rebellion in 1965. I was 14 years old. And I was scared. I lived in Palm Lane housing projects, and all around us were flames. I mean, literally. That was on the border of Watts, in between Watts and Compton. So my friend and I climbed to the top of a baseball backstop, and we could see a whole area surrounded. In Compton, we could see the markets burning. In Watts, we could see 103rd Street burning. So it was a very frightening experience for me, really. And, you know, even though we were 14, we were not inclined to go loot. You know, the stereotype is that all people did was loot. No, it was just scary. But then, when I had my own kids, by 1992, they were pre-adolescents. And they were like asking questions. What's going on? You're doing the so-called Rodney King riot, which is really the LAPD rebellion, because they started it, them and the Highway Patrol. They started asking questions that I could not answer about what was happening, right? So that's why I decided to try to change my thesis to write and explain to them what this whole thing was about, because it was very frightening. I remember we were sitting at TV, looking at TV, because that's the thing, it was being televised, right? We were in the living room looking at TV, and we saw when the Jack in the Box on Rosecrans and Central burned down. I mean, it's a strange feeling to see your favorite Jack in the Box being burned down. All right, so they're asking questions, and I'm trying to explain to them So I figured, well, okay, let's write something. Maybe that would help. And that made me do a lot of research. I don't think, looking back, I still don't think I did an adequate job of trying to explain the dynamics of all of that at that time, because I didn't know what I know now, really. But that was kind of what started this whole writing thing for me. And so I felt there was more to be said, and that's why I migrated to short story fiction and later to poetry to try to say more, really.
You just answered the next question.
So, would both of you speak up for those of us who can't hear you?
Oh, okay. So the reason why you chose the short story form, you were trying to teach your children about what was going on in the world around them.
Well, there were not just my children, there's a whole generation of folks that don't really know. I mean, like you just said, we were kind of like Carter Woodson said, most of us were miseducated, really. And so you have to do something to try to offset that. What they and my kids did not know. There's a whole lot of kids that my kids had the benefit of having a mother who's a school teacher, a second grade school teacher, so she made sure that they always had the basics that they needed at every grade level, right? So they got a lot of attention. But like many of their friends and many of the folks I grew up with never got that kind of attention, really. So I made it my point, okay, well, I'm going to see if I could contribute to that absence, really.
Do you have a target audience per se?
Yeah, I was hoping most of them would show up here today. But the target audience basically are the folks who live in Watts and Compton. Really, that's who I kind of write for. And a couple of my friends who I grew up with, they're reading the book now. And one of them, who happens to be a judge, he actually said that when he read some of those stories, it made him sit and think about what he had forgotten about Palm Lane public housing. I said, that makes writing this book worthwhile. When I get that kind of feedback, that's what I live for.
Does Palm Lane still have their reunions?
I think most of us are probably dead. Really.
Because I didn't know anything about it when I came to LA and they were talking about these reunions like a big deal.
Most of the people that were doing that, they probably have expired by now. That's probably why it's not happening anymore.
It's a great place to get information.
It really was. It really was. But I haven't heard of it now in many years, so I suspect that they're not doing it.
Do they have a neighborhood council that was nearby in that area?
In Palm Lane?
Yeah, like a neighborhood council. Like I know, like in the West Athens, Westmont area, they have neighborhood council, and so you have the older generation that like pours down the information. Like they talk about. I remember one of the meetings we had, a CAT meeting, and one of the ladies, she's lived in the area since the '60s, and she was talking about redlining and how she lived in one of the first houses that they actually allowed African Americans to purchase, because when her and her husband moved out here from Minnesota, she's like, I want that house.
Okay.
And the realtor told her, don't even look down that street.
Right.
You can't move on that street. She goes, that's my house.
Okay.
And they ended up moving there, but it was some years later. But in our library over there, we don't have that information. It has to be like word of mouth.
Yep.
You know, where they're talking about like the restrictive covenants and things of that nature.
So the answer to your question answer is no. We didn't even think in those terms of trying to maintain that kind of information. Matter of fact, we were not aware of the redlining and the covenants. I mean, that's why people were just coming into Compton in the early 1950s. But up until that point, and then when they came to the southern end of Compton because people figured they couldn't keep them out, so we let them come into this little southern end. But up until that point, you couldn't even move into Compton because of those restricted covenants. But we didn't know that. We didn't know anything about covenants at that time. We didn't know anything about redlining. So no, we didn't have those kind of discussions at all. We just knew we couldn't go over there. It's just like Southgate, Linwood, and all these places. We just kind of, through osmosis, knew that we were not welcome, so we didn't go there. It was communicated to us, but there was never much discussion about it. We pretty much accepted it.
it seems like the same places that we weren't welcomed in, now when you say the names of those cities, it's synonymous with African Americans. So when you say Inglewood, you say Compton, people think African Americans.
Right.
To the outside of California, most people do not know that we weren't allowed in those
Oh, yeah,
places.
definitely.
And since you know the history, I was wondering if you thought about writing a book about the politics of Compton, because it used to be Lily White, it's no longer Lily White. And I think you have a lot of inside information that we don't know.
Well, since actually I am working on a book with a group of people right now where we are addressing that, because you can't separate the history from what's happening in Compton right now. People think that, so you got to talk about, I was just having this conversation yesterday, matter of fact, because it's a popular notion that when the white people moved out of Compton, things just got bad. Not necessarily. It didn't really, because for a while it was pretty well maintained. But I think part of the problem was when they moved out, they didn't leave any instructions or any memos on how to maintain what they were doing. They just took their resources. They had a lot of resources. They took their businesses. They just left. And then if you look like at parks and recreation, they didn't leave the instructions on how to maintain the parks to where you actually water them regularly and have the grass grow to a certain height, how to prune trees. All of these detailed things, they just up and left. They didn't leave us, right? So what we're doing is writing about some of the problems, but we're also giving a solution on how it could be mitigated. I mean, basically, I think, like I said earlier, you don't know what you don't know. So I'm writing a book with a group of other people where we're going to tell you what you need to know to turn this whole thing around. Basically, it comes down asking people to do the job that they were hired for. But I don't think a lot of them really know how to do the job. So we'll tell them.
And the Compton Police Department is so unusual. I mean, somebody should do a story on the police department. Do we still have a police department? Or is
Well,
it
the sheriff came in 2001, and so they replaced the Compton PD at that time.
Because of?
Well, basically because there was some problem with the then mayor and the Compton PD. I mean, when you're dealing with law enforcement, I mean, the whole history of black people in law enforcement has been a negative one. So it was no different then, really. So he didn't know really how to deal with the Compton PD, so he decided to go with the sheriff. But as it turns out, the sheriff is no better. I mean, when you look at the services they're offering and the quality of them, it's no better, really. But we're going to talk about, in the city charter for Compton, they have a chief of police, and the sheriff department is now the chief of police in Compton. But whoever it is needs to provide the services that the people of Compton want and deserve. But until you start talking to the people in Compton and working with them, you'll never do it. So to answer your question, we are working on that book as we speak. Matter of fact, when I leave here today, I'm going to another presentation. I'm going to make another presentation that talks about parks and recreation to the concerned citizens of Compton. So yeah, we you know, hopefully if I keep breathing, I'll be able to finish that book.
So you said that you're writing another book. What does your writing process look like?
One of the members of their writing that book asked me that. She said, "Well, Ron, when do you sleep?" And I said, "Well, I sleep, you know, that's not the problem. I make a hell of a sacrifice. There's some other areas she didn't ask me about that I'm making sacrifices in, but sleep is not one of them." So I just learned, though, having to work and raise a family, and that I've learned how to manage my time. And I know how to focus, and I'm disciplined. And once I got my mind made up, I'm going to make it happen. That's all. So I just work hard at it. That's all it really is, really.
So do you have any advice or nuggets of wisdom that you would give would-be writers that are in this room? Because I'm assuming all of y'all, you either write books, you love books like myself, or you want to write a book. So do you have any nuggets that you would bestow upon these folks?
Yeah, the first thing is to start writing. See, the thing, at the beginning, it took me a long time to accept that I'm a writer, right? Because I felt like an imposter. But as soon as you start writing, you are a writer. I mean, that's the reality of it, really. And if you want to write a book, a novel, or whatever you want to write, you just got to start. You got to start. And people like to say if you write one sentence a day, at the end of the year, you have almost a book. I would say if you write a paragraph a day, you will have a book. You have more than one book. Really, it doesn't. See, the thing is, it doesn't have to be perfect, because one thing you learn as a writer is that the first drafts are shitty anyway. Understand that, right? I mean, this collection that I got, it's got 13 stories in it, but that's a 12-year process of rewrites. I mean, some of those stories I've probably written as many as 30 or 35 times. And that's what people don't know and understand. You're gonna be writing it until you get it. So it's not just an overnight thing, but if you start writing, just start writing and make it up in your mind, I'm going to finish this no matter what. That's really it. And anybody could do that, really.
As a writer, and also for new writers, do you recommend online studies, or do you recommend classroom studies, or is one better than the other in terms of structure and character development?
Well,
my weakness is tension, creating tension. I know every writer has their own weakness there. And so, what do you recommend? And we're talking about money too.
Well, it's two things you're talking about there. One, you're talking about the method, whether you show up in a class or you could do Zoom and take these classes. I've done both.
Right.
At UCLA, I spent those until COVID, I was on the campus. I think it's better when you're dealing with, because those workshops that you do, you got to do a lot of workshopping with other people, giving you feedback on your stories, right? And that, to me, is done better live, really. But since I've stopped going on campus, I take a lot of online classes, too. They will tell you, like what you just asked, they will tell you enough about character, really. They'll tell you enough about this sensory details and descriptions, and then the rest is just you doing it. But I think in person is the best experience, but you can learn a great deal, not only online, but I subscribe to a lot of magazines, Poets and Writers, for example. They're always sending you information, right? And I take that information and use it too. So wherever you can get it, that's really what it is, really. But you don't necessarily have to go to classes physically to learn and become a better writer.
Well, would you bless us with a selection from your book?
Absolutely. See, what are we doing time-wise here? Okay, we're not that bad. I was asked about a film for a short story. I hope that happens. This particular one is titled Pregnancy Test. When it came to Pearline Woodson, his 88-year-old mother, Frederick mostly did his best and cried the rest. I misjudged the distance, Pearline said from her oversized wheelchair to the ER triage nurse dressed in steel blue scrubs. That step was further than it used to be. Pearline wore a black plastic frame bifocals and covered her brown, impish face like goggles. She didn't want to be there, but he couldn't take a chance, even if it meant arguing with his boss because he was late from lunch again. All they do is make you wait, talk to you any old way. The doctor's gone before you can blink your eye, Pearline had said before they left home, even though she could hardly bear the pain. His mother's most recent fall happened 2 weeks ago. She let it slip after she nearly stumbled over her living room coffee table while he told her again about the shitty way his sergeant treated him at his parking enforcement job. She's always in my ass about something, he said. I need to be more punctual, she told me. Damn, I'm at work every day. What more does she want? Pearline's white hair poked from beneath a checkered green and red headscarf. Your daddy went into the hospital for his stroke. After a while, he came back to himself and up and talking. The next thing you know, they called and said he died from sepsis. What the hell is sepsis anyway? That's the way they do us. You go in, but you don't come out. Just another dead nigger from Watts, Pearline said. The nurse strapped a blood pressure cuff to Pearline's arm. Do you have any allergies to medicine? Tylenol makes me woozy, Pearline said, and squint-eyed the monitor's systolic-diastolic pressure numbers. Her pulse rated 111. Pearline nodded her head toward Frederick. He made me take some before we left. Frederick pressed his lips flat in a false smile, disinfectant searing his nose. His eyes fell on a crinkled and soiled crepe on the exam table. And under the nurse's small desk, a waste container overflowed with dirty white tape and bloody gauze. When Pearline broke her hip several years ago, she required surgery, a hospital stay, recovery, painful PT, and lots of in-home care until she progressed from bedridden to a wheelchair, to the walker, to a cane, and back to her own 2 feet. He learned then to call 911 whenever an older adult falls. It was like watching a baby learn to walk. Pearline took months of repair, the time he no longer had since Sergeant Asshole rode him like Frederick rode exercise bikes in spinning class. Republicans were forever trying to kill Obamacare, and where would she go if she needed long-term care? After arguing, he sped off to the St. Francis of Assisi ER. Frederick's tension was released when the triage nurse screensaver flashed. It's never wrong to do the right thing. It's a good idea for ER visits because old bones are brittle, fragile, and need viewing with an x-ray, the nurse said. Pearline gripped her upper thigh and tried to lean forward. Shit, that hurts, she said. Tylenol's not worth a damn thing. We'll get you over for x-rays, the triage nurse said. She removed the blood pressure cuff from Pearline's arm, rubbed her shoulder, and gestured for the nurse assistant to bring a wheelchair. Word, I'm dizzy. Whoa, Pearline said, her face scrunched with pain. Do we need a pregnancy test? The assistant said. Tiny Employee of the Month pins clustered on the NA's breast pocket. The pink white tube of her stethoscope dangled from her instrument pocket. People under gray fluorescence, writhing on gurneys like worms, flanked the ER corridor as she pushed his mother's squeaky wheelchair across scuffed floors through a tincture of iodine odor. Ha! It hurts when you make me laugh, Pearline said, grabbing her hip. Despite the pain, sunshine rose on Pearline's face as white light pierced popcorn clouds. I'm 66, Frederick said. Despite his throat thickness, he was grateful that the nurse could coax humor and see his mother smile, given the situation and their mutual hospital apprehension and suspicions. Too old for a little brother, Frederick said. He was an only child and often wondered what having a sibling would be like. He was sure a brother or sister would have been preferable to a few cousins and friends. Frederick passed on marriage opportunities and had no children of his own. Pearline and his job were all he had. The nurse belly laughed. Would a baby sister work for you? She said, while wheeling Pearline into space number 13, the last unoccupied area. Thick puce accordion curtains on two sides, a vital sign machine, exam gloves, cotton balls, and other medical stuff behind the headboard. Space 13 offered a clear view of activity in the main corridor, and of course, the unsettling monitor beeps, screams, and a mix of shit and alcohol redolent of the urban emergency rooms. Maybe he should call Sergeant Asshole and let her know about his situation. He used so many excuses before, his truth now seemed like a lie. He rubbed the cell phone screen with his thumb. He lost his train of thought when he saw a technician roll by with a woman on a gurney in 4-point restraints, escorted by a deputy sheriff. I still got to get shoes for my kids, vampire teeth, and a pumpkin, the woman said, lifting her torso somewhat, unable to move her limbs. Halloween was 3 days away. Pearline yelled, "Try the 99-cent store next to the Well of Good Wishes. It's at the Compton Artesia Blue Line station," she said. A deputy said something about 5150 into his lapel radio. The woman struggled on a gurney against the constraints and said, "Calluses on your hands stay forever. They never go away." "I'm praying for you, honey," Pearline said. She turned the wheelchair toward the corridor, regarded the woman, and said softly, "You should try Jergens lotion. Get it at the 99-cent store." Then, glaring at the deputies and technician, Pearline said, "Free up her hands. Loosen the straps." "Calm down, Ma," Frederick said. "That's just the Tylenol you took talking." While waiting for the x-ray tech, Frederick and Pearline overheard an interview through the curtains. The voice sounded like a male nurse or another attendant. White walking shoes and twilight blue scrub legs moved between the curtain wall and the tile floor. "We've told you before that your impaired liver probably causes edema from drinking so much alcohol, Mr. Irons." Irons said, I tried to stop, but it was too hard. Everybody in my family uses drugs. I caught my parents mainlining horse in the kitchen when I was 8. My daddy stuck a needle in his neck. Yeah, I love to drink. I started with alcohol, tried marijuana, everything. The voice said, "It might be right for them, Mr. Irons, but wrong for you." Pearline said, "My cousin Harold's heart twitched from drinking too much." Beyond the curtain, there was a rasping sound like Velcro removed. The person interviewing the drunk said, "It takes less time to do things right than to explain why you did wrong." "Yak, yak, yak," he said. "You sound like my ex." Frederick checked his cell phone. The situation did not look good. Sergeant Asshole would be pissed when he showed up late, reprimanding him in her log, threatening to transfer him to traffic control, where he stand in rush hour intersections, directing crazy South LA drivers. The attendant said to Irons, "Let's fight the flu." Irons groaned. "Have you had your flu shot?" he asked. Irons groaned again. "Roll up your sleeve." Pearline turned in her wheelchair, faced the curtain, and said, "Harold died from consumption. His brain just shut down." Frederick's breathing grew heavier. He stepped into the corridor, squinted down the hall, and muttered, "Where's that x-ray guy?" Sergeant Asshole was probably asking herself the same question about him. Pearline scoffed at the curtain separating her from space number 12. He loves to drink," she said. "I hope the fool doesn't dry." Irons said, "Hey," and started coughing. Then an ugly gurgle and choking sound preceded a flurry of activity in space number 12. Cold sepsis crackled from the PA system. Whisked away, red-faced, irons bounced up and down, IV lines attached to his wrists. Pearline cupped her hands around her mouth. "Consumption," she said. Seated on the doctor's stool, Frederick did toe raises and folded his arms across his body. What if she needed surgery? He winced at the whiff of antiseptic something or other. He glanced at the wall clock. He'd lose money if he didn't return to work or lose his job. He could lose Pearline if he did. She moaned in agony and hummed Amazing Grace. She only sings hymns when she's gloomy and depressed. "See," Pearline said, "what I tell you. They'll have us waiting here forever." She shook her head as if to clear cobwebs. "Never get out this damn place," she said. "Things could be worse, Ma." In her large eyeglasses, he regarded a dim reflection of his receded hairline, having washed it over the years, gradually thinned at his temples into an M shape, thinning to his crown. Eventually, the two areas met, forming a U shape like a horseshoe. Did the cornrows he styled as a young buck, or perhaps his man bun worn in his 30s, cause him to lose his mane? He read somewhere that coconut milk might regrow hair. He lived long enough to see black hairstyles come and go, from close and nappy to chemically straightened, to blown out natural, to jerry curls and back again, sometimes somewhere in between along the way. Versatile. He liked the manageability of an outdated semi-processed loop, even with its expense and maintenance requirements. Inevitably, styles would change again to a mohawk, shaved temples, or maybe just wild. Would he live to see the next hair fad? He imagined himself in the Slauson Avenue and Crenshaw Boulevard intersection directing traffic, jerry curl juice dripping on his uniform shoulder. He looked good. "You could have hit your head on something, Ma," he told Pearline. She sat stiffly in the wheelchair until a disturbance. "They shot my baby," a young woman's voice wailed through the ER corridor. A little body, maybe a year, give or take a month, surrounded by 3 paramedics, a bloody towel under his tiny head. One paramedic covered the child's mouth and nose with the BVM. One squeezed the bag to deliver ventilation, and the third navigated the gurney in the same direction irons and the restrained woman had gone. "Code red," said the voice over the PA system. A gaggle of young men wearing blue clothing followed the woman, shouting, cursing, and imploring stragglers to move. "Get the fuck out of the way," one said. "We know who did this," said another. The corridor thick with Crip members, overwhelmed hospital security guards. Pearline jumped to the clack, clack, clack of weapons loading. Nurses and attendants created a human barrier between gang members and the operating room at the end of the corridor. No one got in. "Drive by," Pearline said. She closed her eyes and moaned as if to process all that had happened. "We'll probably camp here tonight. I hurt. I'm tired, Frederick. I need to lie down," she said. Her eyes dulled, her voice monotone. Frederick helped his mother to stand. "Ow!" she hollered. He unfurled a fresh piece, tore it, and smoothed out the crimp covering the exam table. Was anywhere safer than a hospital emergency room? He removed her shoes, and she grimaced when he lifted her under her arms onto the table like a child. Unable to sit, she lay on her side. "Could I stand with a broken hip?" she asked Frederick. He shrugged and covered her with a backless examination gown. He tried to comfort her and told her about his meter maid job, how people double park, block street sweepers, ignore no parking signs during rush hour, and how his sergeant makes him do all the crud work she doesn't like to do, such as ticketing elders who forgot their handicap placards. He didn't mention his obsession with physical fitness, how he was late to work mornings when jogging and late from lunch when he visited the gym. "My sergeant's a real bitch." "I could have written that book," she said, "like ghost summer stories. Sounds like Abby in the lake. Now there's a real bitch using her young boy students to fix her house in the Florida swamps. She turns into a fish and then she eats them. You should read it. Her stare was empty, head resting on prayer palms pressed together. I've seen much abuse, she said. It's like the calluses on your hands, stays forever, never goes away. Frederick was more of a television guy and never read his mother's suggestions. He preferred crime drama and legal stuff like Better Call Saul. Yeah, he said, running through stop signs and red lights is a new sport. People do all kinds of stupid shit in cars these days, he said. Except for the noisy patient monitors, there was a moment of complete silence until Frederick pulled back the privacy curtain and stirred into the empty corridor. Shit. If I were a cop, I'd shoot half of them. His jaw and facial muscles tightened. What's taking these people so long? Sergeant Aslo was probably ticketing and posting the intersection by herself by now. Maybe he'd help her some. Be more punctual. Perline's eyes closed when she said, I've seen them speeding and texting. Got my Jergens, though. Teachers turning into fish, Jergens, when the hospital using Nivea? Was Mom showing signs of old age? I have a deadline, Ma, Frederick told Perline. I do too, she said. With God. Who's yours with? He considered what she said. Nobody, Ma, he said. I'm staying here with you. Frederick rolled the stool he was sitting on to the foot of the exam table. He unwound it to top height, then laid his head down into folded arms, like a first grader taking a nap at school. He closed his eyes but opened them when a platoon of SWAT deputies raced down the corridor for the operating room. We're en route to the OR, a deputy said into his lapel radio. Put down your weapons, one of them shouted. Fuck the police, was the reply. Gang members need backup, said the SWAT deputy. Gunfire exploded like the news footage of Syrian battles. Stray bullets whizzed by, pinged the metal medical equipment, and embedded into walls. Do you hear that? Perline said. Frederick did not answer. He stood and bent over his mother to shield her. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it had started. There was commotion near the operating room. Heavily tatted deputies hoisted several young men in handcuffs down the corridor by their collars. Frederick's skin tightened and words exploded from his throat. Take their stupid asses to jail. Perline's x-ray results arrived with an emergency room doctor 4 hours later. Just a contusion, she said. Give it a few days, return in a week. Then the doctor vanished. Well, at least we know one thing, said the NA as she rolled Perline outdoors to a patient loading area. Perline's eyebrows squished together. Frederick's stomach muscles tightened like when he did set-ups. You're not pregnant, she said. Frederick punched his cell phone buttons, deciding to order coconut milk online. Then he called Sergeant Asshole. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, so, she was 80 what?
88. 88.
And I believe in miracles. Sarah was old. Right. We'll just leave that there. But you have a sense of humor. I mean, shooting in an operating room. The first thing I thought was, aren't there oxygen tanks? But I was like, let me not interrupt. But how did you get that? Like, because there's so many things going on. I mean, we know she loves her Jergens. We know that. And she could be the spokesperson for the dollar store. Because she's telling everybody to go there. You know, like, you got Halloween coming up, you can get this for your babies there. Oh, your hands are rough, you can get this there. So, how, are there people in your life that you're like, oh yeah, you are who this person is fashioned after? Or did you pass somebody at Ralph's and you're like, boom, I'm copying you for this book?
This is homage to my mother, as my two sons and my brother probably know. Yeah, so that it was based on some experiences as a caregiver my brother and I had with my mother, really, you know. So we were just, it was a serious and it was a tough time, but even with that, it was kind of interspersed with humor, you know. So yeah, that's probably what it is. It's kind of based on her, and plus, you know, I worked in hospitals forever. So when I go into the emergency room, I see things most people probably don't even pay attention to, really, because I've spent so much time there. So all of that just came together in this story.
That's funny, because I used to work in a hospital when I was in college, and I remember we had a girl, she was with one gang member, she was his girlfriend, but she was pregnant by a rival gang member.
Whoa.
And they all showed up, because there's a baby being born. But this is Fort Worth, Texas, so yeah, it was exciting. It was a very exciting day at work.
Well, there's the story right there.
Yeah, no, my story was get home, but yeah, you know, so when you're saying like them showing up with the guns, I was like, yeah, that can happen.
Yeah.
I'm sure that has happened several times. So, okay, and if individuals are interested in getting your books, how can they get your books?
Right there, back there on the table, those who don't have anyone, they can pick up that Crooked Out of Compton as well as What's Upright, which is a poetry collection I did halfway through the short story collection back in 2022. So.
Okay, all right.
And other than that, it's always online on Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble and wherever you find good books.
Okay.
I enjoyed it. I forgot you worked in the hospital. Did you do research to know all this stuff about the hospital? But you worked there.
Where's there?
I see, because normally you have to do a lot of research, but you had it already.
After they kicked
I
us,
thought I was there.
after they kicked us out of King, right? I ended up getting a job there several years later.
I got you.
Okay, full circle moment. Okay.
Maybe I put a
Yeah,
circle on it.
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Does anyone have questions?
I have just a couple of them. Under our wonderful new administration, and with book banning and everything, and the destruction of the Department of Education, how are writers, what's the best strategy for writers to use to stay afloat?
Move to California.
I don't know what to do. Go to Canada, I don't know.
Well, the first thing is that you got to continue to write.
Just right.
And understand that it's only going to get tougher to get the word out there. But as long as, see the thing, unless someone figures out how to control the internet, we good to go. I mean, they could burn them all, but how are you going to burn a book that's on the internet? All right, you got ebooks, you got audio books, you got a whole explosion of opportunities out here to get the book all over the world. So while these idiots down south are burning physical books, let them keep on. I'm going to keep on writing. You know, I ain't going to stop.
And how do we deal with AI? How can AI help us?
AI helps me tremendously. Like, you know, workshopping is part of the writing experience, right? So in the absence of having someone you can give your stories, your information to read, I actually write something and I ask a critique from AI. I have ChatGPT, I'm not going to lie. See, what I don't do, though, I do not ask ChatGPT to generate anything for me. And I just experimented with it and it comes back bullshit. I mean, it does. It's some simple idiot stuff, right? But what I will ask it to do is, after I've written something, to critique it for me.
And they give you good feedback.
Yeah, what it does is gives you the basic school stuff they teach you, right? Sensory details, description. They'll tell you that. They'll give you that feedback. And see, the thing as a writer, you don't always remember to put everything that needs to be in there. So that it'll serve to remind you that there's some elements you might want to consider, right? Yeah. I don't have any problem with that. But I don't ask it to write a story for me, and then I'm going to try to pass that over as something that I've written. I will never do that, because AI doesn't reflect my voice. That's the other thing, right? It doesn't tell the story the way I want to tell it. I've experimented with it. I'm writing a poetry collection now, and I ask it to give me some artwork based on the poem. And they gave me some old stuff, right? And it was about black people. And so it gave me this, this depiction of some real light-skinned, almost white black people. And I said, well, they're not dark enough. Can you make them darker, right? And so it came back with something a little bit darker. And no matter how I wrote it, I said, can you make them African? Can you make them black? Can you know, I gave all these distortions and never could do it, right? So it has some tremendous limitations.
Would you give them I'm finishing up a screenplay. Would they critique a screenplay?
Yeah, critique. They'll do whatever you want. Whatever you ask them to do.
Long and all that kind of stuff.
Well, okay, I haven't gone beyond several thousand words, but you could try to see.
Just chunk it out.
Yeah. You could break it up. Yeah.
But I know, and how you were saying with like the colorism with AI, but that's something we've had issues with technology anyways, because with sensors, if you notice, like sometimes door sensors don't always pick us up.
Yes.
Like
Water fountains.
Yeah, water fountains, like when you're trying to wash your hands. Like, because I know if I go like this, nope, I have to go like this.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, we understand that's a
They don't
hand.
get it,
And it's
right.
like, that's your palm,
That's
but
the
it
color
doesn't
that they don't
understand
get
the
to
back of your
catch it,
hand.
right.
Well, we gotta we gotta understand too who is the one writing the code and doing all that. I mean, it ain't we're not in. I don't think we're in the room at all, really. So these people that are doing this have blind spots, tremendous blind spots, and that's one of the limitations to it, really.
Yeah.
But I use it for what I can use it for.
And back to your question before, where you were asking about like book bans,
Yeah.
supporting your libraries. Because if you see like libraries in northern states and western states, what we did during book bans, like we offered digital library cards to those who live in the South. That's how we combated it. So like Brooklyn PL, like they have a huge thing they did for teens where they made sure that their whole collection is available, because you have the Schomburg Library there, which has the largest collection of black literature. So kiddos in Mississippi, they can read it, and like
With the digital library.
with the digital library card. And California did the same thing as well in a lot of our libraries to make sure, you know, but also if somebody doesn't have the technology to get a hold of it, you know, like that's something else that we have to look at as well. So we have to make sure that when we're voting, it's not just for ourselves. Our voice is someone else's voice. So we have to make sure that we're covering our brothers and sisters that are south of the Mason-Dixon line.
And how can we get bodies back into the library? I like the movie. I like that. The movie at the end of the month.
Oh, the Melanated Movie Nights, which we do have next week. Y'all, Hidden Figures. Hidden Figures is this month's showing. I mean, it's just different programs that we can do. Like this program, this is huge. You know, like a lot of people never have the opportunity to like sit down with an actual author.
Right.
You know, but it's just different types of programs, and I think we kind of shot ourselves in the foot during the pandemic, where when we went to virtual programs and tried to make sure everybody could get it, but now everybody wants us to just do virtual programs.
Yeah.
And when you do virtual programs, there's a segment of the population that doesn't get reached because they do not have, you know, the computer or the internet. A lot of people come to the library for those things still. So it's just letting the public know, hey, this is what you can get, that we're more than books.
Yeah.
And we keep trying, so keep telling your friends, we're here. We're here. Please tell them so I can keep a job. Please.
I heard that.
Okay. I can't retire for 19 more years. Please tell your friends that we're here. You got a question?
So, are you setting up your own tour to be able to speak and share your book, or is someone doing that for you?
No, I'm not doing much really. When something comes to me, you know, I'm to the point to where unless I'm invited, I don't go, because what happened was when I did that poetry collection, if you're doing poetry, you could do something every day of the week. right? And I noticed I was getting burnt out trying to do open mics and all of that kind of stuff. So I had to back off. And plus, I couldn't write when I'm always doing that kind of stuff, right? So I had to back off, and I decided I'm only going to go when invited, right? But I do need to do more of this kind of thing in my community. That's really what I want to do. You know, I've talked with the Compton Library, and we'll see how it goes. I'll be okay with doing like local libraries. I mean, Watts, L.A., yeah, I would be okay doing that kind of thing.
What
So
about local, like, black bookstores?
how many do we have left?
Well, I know, like, in Pasadena, you have Octavia's Bookshelf.
That's true.
And then I know we have the one there at, I know,
Coliseum.
yeah, Coliseum. Yeah, and then you have the one, it's not Fox Hills Mall, what is it?
Yes, one in Fox Hills.
Westfield at Culver City Mall, but you have in there as well, so, you would be open to that?
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
Because I know when we did the Archives Bazaar at USC, we had a couple of folks who stopped by our table, and they were asking if the resource centers would go to, like, different minority-owned bookstores.
Mhm.
That's not our jam, but I could give them your information.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So, were you included in, I know, is it USC or is it UCLA that has the book festival every year?
That's USC, the
That's
Festival of
USC,
Books.
Festival of Books. Were you invited to participate in that? Have you been invited?
Well, yeah, a couple of years ago, actually what I did, I volunteered for the independent writers booth. And I think I read poetry there, but that kind of invitation you're talking about, no, not really. But I have been invited to stuff. Pasadena invited me to read at some of their stuff. So I do get invitations. And at SC, I did something recently too. So from occasionally, yes, but SC, oh, I know what it is. The AWP conference is going to be in Los Angeles. It's a conference that moves around the country each year. And they're going to be in Los Angeles, I think, in February or March. And I'm going to be working with one of my publishers to do several things with AWP presentations, reading, that kind of thing, really. So yes and no, not as much as I like to, probably, because what I notice about USC, they pretty much cater to those who are at the very top of the game. I mean, you always see those big names, right? But then the tier underneath that and underneath that, they don't really get recognized at SC. And I'm not at that tier, really.
Have you gone to, like, the Lamert Park Book Fair?
I did a few years ago. I didn't go this year.
Well, we've been waiting for our invitation to come back. We don't know when it's going to be, but
Yes, yes.
When Essalon was in Lamert, so are they still doing it even though Essalon is shut down?
well, I know they did one last year, but because we didn't have a Black Resource Center librarian, we weren't able to participate. And so the prior Black Resource Center librarian's been in, talks with them and letting them know, like, hey, Cheryl's there, like, talk to her. And we haven't heard anything, so we don't know if they're not doing it again or what's happening. But if I get information, I'll pass it on to you.
Sure. Okay.
And my last question, since you are reading here at this library, is your book now able to be checked out
Yes.
in the library?
It's been added to the collection. So all local authors are welcome. I do ask, when you're good on this and you're good on this, please make sure you check the grammar, make sure that it's good to go. Because I just don't ever want to put something out where individuals who do not look like us, they're checking it out and they talk down on you, and get on social media and say things, because I can't come to bat and try to defend you as well as possible.
So are you talking about mistakes made, or are you talking about like anthropology, like I know Gloria Hurston, she wrote in vernacular of how people are.
Vernacular is different from, like, let's say you have a run-on sentence, and
Okay,
it's
okay.
like purposeful, but it's not vernacular at all. It's just you don't know where to put commas and periods. Yeah. So, and I try to like read stuff like, I'll be nice, but I'll say I can't say that.
Well, what she's talking about, though, is a part we haven't mentioned. what goes into producing a book. That's a whole different avenue. Matter of fact, we're going to talk about that, I think, on December 12th right here. We're going to have a panel with the AC Bilbrew Writers Group. Well, that's one of the things we're going to talk about, because editing, we didn't talk about editing, right? Because, I mean, my book was edited 4 or 5 times, right, by different editors. And that is significant. That's how you get rid of those errors and stuff, right? And you make it make sense when you have editors. And that's a whole discussion in itself. So I would say come back December 12th when we are here and find out more about that.
December 12th?
Yeah.
14th, I think.
14th?
Saturday?
No, December 14th is Saturday.
It's 14th? Okay, yeah. There it is.
But, I mean, future programs that we have here, if you're interested, on Tuesday, we're having a health panel where we partnered with Californians. We're talking about renal health. We have Hidden Figures next Saturday, if you guys would like to come to that. At the end of the month, we have an Afro Indigenous program where we're talking about the Seminole Maroons. So we do have programming. I have flyers on the back table for you. If you would peruse those, pass them out, let folks know. But yes, we would love to have folks back in the library. And thank y'all for coming out today and supporting. So can we have a round of applause?
Yeah, I would say thank you all too. I got two, I was fortunate. I have a Berkeley Bear, who is my daughter, and I got 2 Morehouse men. All right, and they're both are here. One's filming the Facebook Live, the other one's filming with the real camera there.
That was in the book I wrote, Morehouse Man. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, was it?
I'm proud that the child was going to Morehouse.
Okay.
The Morehouse Man.
Okay, well, I got 2 of them. One's in my grave paying for them, but they got it. So that's Aaron and Ahmad. Thank you guys for coming. My brother Richard is right there. All right. My Shariki is with the other writing group I belong to, Saturday morning literary group. And, of course, Pat is with the AC Bilbrew Writers Group.
Huh?
Huh?
We'll make sure they come to the 14th event, but maybe we should all get together, the writers. I don't know what kind of event we can have, but something.
Friendsgiving with pencils.
Say what?
Friendsgiving with pencils. That's can write and eat.
Oh, when is that?
No, I'm telling you what event to have.
Oh, Friendsgiving
With pencils.
with pencils. We can come up with something where we get to know everybody. We don't know everybody.
Okay, well,
We
We
can figure
can
out
post
something.
something here.
you got the leader of the Black Resource
I know.
Center right here, Cheryl Call. All right.
Get us together.
Yeah. Oh,